Welcome back now. North Korea, in response to President Trump's latest warning, North Korea's state-run newspaper is now saying that the country's military is, quote, on standby and ready to fire on the U.S. mainland. Joining me right now is the chairman of House Armed Services Committee, Texas Congressman Mac Thornberry. And, Mr. Chairman, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Marie.
What should we think of that? That North Korea is saying we're ready to launch in the next couple of weeks, perhaps in the middle of August?
Well, North Korea has a history of inflammatory rhetoric, but at some point we've got to take what they say seriously. And so what we have to do is really augment our defensive capabilities so that if they launch something, we can knock it down.
So last week we spoke with UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. I want to ask you about what Ambassador Haley had to say, get your reaction to it. Here's what she said last week.
We hope that they don't do anything further. We hope that they stop this reckless activity. We hope we don't have to do anything. But all options have always been on the table and will continue to be on the table.
Congressman, what are those options?
Well, there are a variety of military options, diplomatic options, economic sanctions options, which all have to be available. But I think Ambassador Haley is exactly right, or as Dr. Kissinger wrote yesterday, for decades our policy has been condemnation and procrastination. We have tried to hope this problem away. It is not going away, and so what we have to do is increase our military capability there in the region to make it clear to North Korea and to China that we're going to stand up and defend ourselves and our allies.
Yeah, I want to ask you about China in a moment, but let me ask you about this idea that, in fact, their missile can reach the U.S. mainland. Do we know that for fact that they actually have the capacity to reach the U.S. mainland right now, or is that speculation?
Well, I think the whole government has been surprised at the progress North Korea's missile program has made. On July 4th and then about a week ago, there were 2 missile launches which could reach part of the continental United States. Now, they were aimed straight up and straight down, but if you alter that trajectory and point them more in a sideways direction, they can reach us. We've known they've had nuclear weapons for some time, and so the acceleration of their testing and as well as their aggressiveness is what makes this such a dangerous time, I think everyone acknowledges.
What are the connections to Russia and Iran? You know, we've talked about the so-called axis of evil, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. Are there connections there that you can tell us about? Then I want to ask you about the Far East.
Well, without going into too much detail, North Korea did not make these leaps on its own. It's had help from others. We have some information about that help, but the key is we are where we are. And unfortunately, our side has underfunded missile defense and as well as other military capability for so long, and now we're playing catch up to meet the threat. That is where I think we really need to focus our efforts. For example, when Congress comes back next month, we need to pass the full-year military funding bill at adequate levels to pump up our missile defense, to get our ships and planes in good repair so that we can better meet this and other threats around the world.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the readiness or lack of our military right now, not just missile defense systems, by the way. What do your colleagues in Congress have to say about that, given that they were part of the issue to vote against increasing funding for missile defenses?
Well, I think it's been a wake-up call for members of Congress on both sides of the aisle in both the House and the Senate. And you're exactly right. The current state of our readiness is partly the responsibility of Democrats and Republicans in Congress, both of whom try to use military funding as political leverage for their other projects. We can't do that anymore. We've got to face these threats straight on and fund the military at the level it needs to, regardless of these other factors.
That's absolutely right. Let me ask you about the Far East, China. Are we giving up on China at this point? They haven't done anything to rein in North Korea. What should we be doing in terms of China? Does it include increased sanctions on Chinese companies? What to do there? And what about Japan?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the number one thing is we need to stay close to our allies, Japan and South Korea. And we're already seeing significant improvements. South Korea's announced they're increasing their defense budget. They are going to have, I believe, the THAAD fully operational soon. Japan is taking additional steps to protect itself. We need to stay together. Secondly, we cannot give up on China. I think the only way this gets resolved peacefully is either we accept North Korea that can hold us hostage, or we and China work together to put North Korea on a different track. So I think economic sanctions are important. Yes, I would sanction Chinese banks that help facilitate North Korea, but even more important is for us to put significantly more military capability right there in the region, which happens to be on China's front porch. They may not like it, but our message to them is, okay, you don't like this extra missile defense and more planes and ships right here in your neighborhood, then help us get this guy under control.
Yeah, Congressman, what are the chances of military activity on the ground in North Korea?
They're not zero, but they're not 100% either. I think what concerns everybody is not only North Korea's military action, but the erratic nature of Kim Jong-un.
Right. Do you want to see regime change?
I don't think we have to see a regime change unless he doesn't change his direction. If he's going to threaten us, then their regime is in danger.
Okay. We will. Then their regime is in danger. That's the bottom line. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you, ma'am.
We'll be